Hello and welcome to Policy and Politics with me, Tarun Nangia. We have with us today Managing Director of Hindalco Industries Limited, the flagship company of the Aditya Birla Group, which is the largest producer of rolled aluminium in the world, with sales in excess of $16 billion. Today, in his capacity as the Vice President of the Aluminium Association of India, he will speak to us on behalf of the industry. Welcome, Mr. Pai, for sparing your time and joining us on this episode of Policy and Politics. Times have changed significantly since we last met over a year ago. Countries are building walls around themselves, so to say, and globalization idea is under threat. America, which was the original proponent of globalization, has surprised many, with President Donald Trump talking of imposing 25% tariff on steel imports, 10% on aluminium. Do you see the world changing, and where is India's place in that world?
I think it's a very good point that you make. I think that globalization, I do not believe the thought or the philosophy behind it is really going away. But what countries are getting very careful about is, if there are some very specific commodities, and normally steel, aluminium, oil, these are some of them, and they have the capacity or capability to produce it in their countries, then they take the point that they don't want to be completely dependent on imports for those commodities. And hence, if they see that because of trade policy that domestic industry is being wiped out, then they are taking steps to protect them. So if you look at why President Trump has done steel or aluminium, is because aluminium industry in the US, the upstream industry, has basically been wiped out. So his point is that aluminium is going to be a key commodity for many things going forward, defense, auto, and hence he wants to make sure that the aluminium upstream industry in the US is protected. Now, you can question whether this methodology of putting unilateral tariffs on many countries, then withdrawing it on more than half those countries, is going to solve that purpose. But I think the thought process behind these tariffs is more about countries now becoming careful that they don't become dependent on third-party countries for critical commodities. That's the way I see it.
So basically, one point is a takeaway that aluminium is the metal of the future, and so countries are taking such kind of measures. Now, for the benefit of the viewers watching this show, please tell us how the common man uses or becomes an end user of aluminium in his day-to-day life, and how does the industry use it?
So aluminium, if you really look at it, all of us are actually using aluminium in nearly everything we do today. So let me start from a basic household type of level, and then I'll come to the higher levels. The fans that is spinning above your head, the phones that you have in your hand, the pressure cookers that you are using, the bulbs that you're having, all those are made of aluminium.
Yes.
And then as you start to go out and you start to get on buses, you start to get on metros, you start to fly on planes, they're all made of aluminium. So what is happening is that as fuel efficiency becomes more and more demanding, the use of aluminium in what I would call mobility, which is whether it's cars, trains, planes, is dramatically increasing. All the high voltage transmission cables in our country, which is power, is made of aluminium. All the solar panels, as solar spreads more and more, are made of aluminium. So aluminium is actually a metal of the future, and it is a critical metal for the country's economy for the next 30, 40 years. Now the beauty, Tarun, is that India has the fourth largest bauxite reserves in the world, which is the primary raw material for aluminium. So I think that as a country, we need to do whatever we can to grow the aluminium industry and protect it.
I'm going to shortly come to that, but I would also want to know that India has a very big upcoming aerospace industry.
Yes.
We're going to manufacture fighter jets and
yes.
even commercial planes, as they say. Does that also use aluminium on a large scale?
Absolutely. As I said, all fighter planes, just like Airbuses and Boeings,
yes.
except the Dreamliner, which went into composites,
yes.
are mostly made from aluminium. So the defense sector is going to be a critical user of high strength aluminium alloys going forward in the future.
And now going forward, that your industry and has partnered the government in the Smart Cities initiative. We have been told that in addition to smart cities, 100% rural electrification, electricity transmission, distribution, your industry is partnering with the government. And in all these sectors, in smart cities specifically, buildings are going to use aluminium in a big way. In China, it already happens. How do you see that growing?
So for us, traditionally in India, 40% of the aluminium has been used by the electricity sectors, which is what you mentioned, transmission cables, electrification. The fastest growing second sphere for us is building and construction. So as we build low cost housing or affordable housing, as you build more multi-storied building, the use of aluminium is growing at double-digit space. Because you use aluminium for facades, you use aluminium for windows, doors, floors, roofs. So I think that the housing sector, especially in the smart city concept, where you get into electrification as well as into multi-storied or affordable housing, all are big users of aluminium.
Now, I have a very worrying point to discuss with you, and the worrying point is that the imports of aluminium in India, as if you compare it to total consumption, is about 55%. It is, last time when we spoke, it was 52%. So full 3 percentage points increase in just 1 year. Given that this government is having a thrust on Make in India, the government must have been very worried, because you know aluminium is a sector where we have both bauxite and coal, the two raw materials essential, and we are still importing 55%. What are your expectations from the government now, given that imports have crossed 55%?
I think, you know, we have been in dialogue with the government. I was recently highlighting this point as the 2018 numbers became finalized. Of the 3.6 million tons of aluminium we consume, 1.95 million tons have been imported, so 55%. Out of that 54%, or 1.95 million tons, 1.1 million tons was of scrap alone.
One third is scrap.
1.1 million tons of 3.6, so 1/3, you're exactly right, is scrap being imported into India. So I think that, you know, there is an economic reason, because scrap comes at a discount to the LME. But I also believe that scrap is a natural part of the overall cycle. But as a country, we must be very careful that the balance is not completely disturbed. We are becoming, in many ways, the dumping ground of the scrap in the world. If you just notice, China put an import duty of 25% on US scrap.
And how much are we charging as import duty?
2.5%.
So which is much less than what we charge on aluminium.
Which is 7.5%.
I'm playing the devil's advocate here. Is there a risk or that actual aluminium may be being imported under the guise of scrap? So,
you know, whenever you create these type of what I call unnatural arbitrages, then you do open loopholes for people to exploit. We are not against, and I'm not personally against saying scrap should not come into India, but there's no reason why the import duty on scrap should be lower than the import duty on the metal. Because anyway, you buy the scrap at a 20% discount to the price of aluminium. So there is a natural gain already put in there. My biggest worry on the scrap, Tarun, is that where does the scrap get used, and is it adequately checked when it comes into the country? Because what happens with scrap is that you get many different types of scrap that are put together. So if you look at the standards which exist, you need to have lab tests done, composition, whether it is radioactive or not should be clear. And then the end use certificates by the people who import the scrap also should be thoroughly done.
If I may interrupt you for a moment, that there is a scrap of aluminium called Zorba. Zorba is made scrap which has got radioactive elements. Anil Swarup, who was earlier in the project monitoring group in the PMO, currently Secretary School Education, he made a point in the PMG that countries all around the world use standards to reject imports which are harmful to their industry. And how come then Zorba comes into India, and what happens, like you have always said, that if it gets into your utensils, which you use to cook your food, do you think India is not using those standards effectively and can be more robust?
I would like to put it that we should be enforcing our standards. I have had many discussions with government officials who have now openly told me that a country like Japan has very little import tariffs, but the non-tariff barriers and the difficulty or the process by which you import into Japan is a magnitude of order higher than in our country. So I think that the standards exist, Tarun, on paper. You can actually go online and check the BIS standard for scrap.
Okay.
Now the question we should ask is, are they being enforced adequately?
So you mean you already have the standards?
We already have the standards.
Okay. Now what is the current capacity utilization, or for viewers, how much of your plant currently operates at what capacity, and not only your plant, the industry-wide?
Yeah, I think it's better for me to talk from an industry perspective, because we today have at least about 4.5 million tons of installed capacity between Vedanta, Nalco and Hindalco.
Yes.
And I think we are running somewhere like 60% capacity, because of the 3.6 million tons that are consumed by the country, 1.95, more than half is being imported.
Yes.
So the rest we are having to export, and hence the full capacity utilization is not taking place.
Now, what does the Aluminium Association think on these two things? India has currently the 5th largest bauxite reserved, the 4th largest coal reserves. A mix that can lead to you people and the Aluminium Association becoming the largest producers of aluminum in the whole wide world. That has not happened, and imports are surging. Where have we missed the bus, and what we can do to catch it?
I think that it should start, in my opinion, with the initial point that you started with. I think that the country, the policymakers should first acknowledge that aluminium is a critical metal that is important for the future of the country going forward.
And how can that be done?
Now, that has to be done through a policy decision by declaring it as a key sector
or a core sector.
And along with the core sector, certain policy decisions have to come in on what can be imported, under what conditions it can be imported, so that domestic industry actually gets the protection it needs.
So you mean the special aluminium policy, or a long vision for India?
Correct. And I'll tell you why it's necessary, because you could ask, why do you need these policies? For the question, as you just said, the US is starting to put unilateral tariffs on aluminium. Other countries are responding. My worry, Tarun, is that this aluminium flow is now going to get diverted into India.
Yes.
And I'll tell you why. The Middle East is importing more than 1 million tons of aluminium to the US.
Okay.
Russia is importing 700,000-800,000 tons of aluminium to the US. Both of them now have come under import tariffs from the US. My worry is, will those flows of aluminium now be diverted to India?
That's a very worrying
that is for me the very worrying trend.
Not only for the local industry, but for employment in general for this country.
Correct.
And it is also said that instead of exporting aluminium as a finished product, we send bauxite out of the country.
Yes.
So we send raw material. And don't you think it's not really good for the country to be exporting raw material when we've got such large capacities of aluminium?
I think so, absolutely. I think that, let's take a country like Indonesia.
Yeah.
And we have a very big copper business, and we are now struggling to get copper concentrate, because Indonesia has decreed to all its companies that within the next 5-6 years, actually they had temporarily stopped the import of copper concentrate. They said you have to do the value addition within the country.
So they are mandating that. They are mandating. So which means raw material will not be exported, export the finished product.
Exactly.
So if I want to take if we take the Indonesia example, then Indonesia recently, or I think a year or two ago, put a stop to export of bauxite.
Yes.
They don't allow bauxite to be exported. They also did it with other minerals.
Copper concentrate.
Copper concentrate also. Now, if Indonesia as a country thinks in its interest, can't India also do the same and open more bauxite mines for the local industry? Because I gather that only 2 bauxite mines opened in the past 30 years in this country.
I think that, Tarun, nobody is going to argue with the logic that you are presenting. I think that what we are going through is a set of, you have to remember where we came from with all the coal mines deallocation to the new process of allocating coal mines or mines in general. So I think that process has to be is playing out. Now, whether as a country we can afford the time that it's taking is a different question.
Yes. So, bauxite being a minor mineral, and I would like to come to it. that do you think that states should be more aggressive in opening these mines? That initiative should come from the states now?
I think that what we have seen both Odisha and Chhattisgarh do, Tarun, you are starting to see it happen.
Yes.
Chhattisgarh has been auctioning bauxite mines. Odisha has just started, they reopened a brand new mine.
Yes.
So I think that the states are slowly getting into the act.
Okay. We will take a break at this juncture. After the break, we are going to discuss how much foreign exchange does India lose because India ends up importing aluminium, where there is no need for importing aluminium because there is domestic capacity. We will ask Mr. Pai on that, but we will take a short break at this moment and we will be right back. Welcome back. Now coming across to the moot point, the central government talks of increasing exports so that we can earn more foreign exchange, and the share of manufacturing as a share of GDP grows from current 15% to 25%, and that is necessary for India to become a developed country. Now, if we see, let us gauge how much we lose in terms of foreign exchange, which can easily be saved because India is importing 55% of the aluminium it consumes. Mr. Pai, if you could give us a ballpark figure on how much does India lose, which it can save easily because aluminium is being imported.
So very simple, 1.95 million tons of aluminium imported, average cost $2,200. You're losing out on nearly $4 billion of foreign exchange. $4
billion a year. So here is it, India can, what you can say, save $4 billion right away by just encouraging its local industry and restricting imports, whether it be an MIP or what kind of policy would you expect for that?
No, I think it's not, you see the other interesting point on imports, Tarun, is that it's a bit, we have to put tariff barriers, we have to put non-tariff barriers because scrap is not going to be stopped by MIP.
Yes.
And of the 1.9 million tons, 1.1 is scrap.
Yes.
So there it's the enforcement of standards.
So you mean if foreign countries are gaming the system to throw aluminium into India or dump it into India, we need to be smart enough to restrict that?
Yeah, it is not a hidden fact that the waste scrap, whether it's aluminium, copper, electrical, generally ends up in countries that take it to process it.
Okay.
And the Western countries don't use it.
Yes.
So this has been a fact. I just think that as India develops, we need to just get smarter now.
Now, coming to my next question, what kind of investments have gone into the aluminium sector in India, and what is the overall depth of the industry, and how does it affect when your capacity is not utilized to say 80-90%?
So look, huge amount. I think last time between Hindalco, Vedanta, we calculated nearly 7.5 lakh crores. It's about $10 billion plus of investment has gone in the last 5 years to put up all this new capacity. And I think that, we have also been now saying we'll put another few billions of dollars in the downstream part so that we can do value-added products in India as well. So I think that it's very important that government measures are taken so that this investment is fully utilized, and the value-added part, which is what I was talking about, electricity, housing, transportation, electric vehicles, all that when it comes in, the aluminium for this does not have to be imported, but actually is provided by Indian companies.
Okay, now that brings me to my next question. This government has a huge thrust on employment creation.
Yes.
And government is using all all that is in its capacity to ensure more and more people get employed.
Yes.
What kind of direct and indirect employment does your industry provide now? And what kind of employment can it provide also, what I call incremental employment, if at all you ensure that your plants operate at full capacity?
So Tarun, the employment is a very, actually it provides 5-6 lakh direct employment. And this, I want to tell you, is actually in what I call the heartland states, because aluminium is in Western Orissa, Southern Orissa, Chhattisgarh,
some of the most backward states.
Some of the states that really need the jobs. It's not on the coastal states where there are other avenues to get these jobs. So the point I'm making is that by encouraging aluminium industry, you actually will increase employment in the states where there is very high levels of unemployment, And I think it's very important that jobs are created
but if
there.
6 lakh is direct, indirect would be more than 1 million.
Yes, absolutely. And then the indirect that comes out, you just need to go to our Utkal refinery in southern Orissa, very remote.
Yes.
And you will see that we are employing about 1,000, 1,500 as direct.
Yes.
But you will see the impact of the whole economy of that region, and it's 10, 15 times that. So I again go back to saying that jobs being created in remote, tribal, heartland states of India is what the aluminium industry gets.
The government's mission is indirectly being achieved when they push aluminium industry.
And when you push mining in general.
Yes.
Because mines, the natural resources are in these states.
No, if we say this government has an aim of taking your manufacturing as a share of GDP from 15 to 25%.
Yes.
It can't happening without turning companies like yours into leading producers and exporters also.
Absolutely.
So do you think that the time has come to give the push to the sector, or this is the time now when we can, push this sector to achieve a 10 million ton capacity or more?
So Tarun, the way I would like to see it is that over the last 2 to 3 years, the Aluminium Association